E allora si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia?
Vi prego, vi imploro, con umiltà e con fiducia, permettete a Cristo di parlare all'uomo.
Don Giuseppe aveva capito il problema che avevo. Se la tua vocazione è vero, il tuo lavoro verrà fuori anche dai sassi.
Di comunicare la fede agli altri, ma veramente insieme a loro riscoprire che cos'è la fede, che cos'è la fede per me. Portare Cristo agli altri, comunicarlo agli altri è l'unico modo che abbiamo per conoscerlo veramente.
L'iter communionis aiuta a comunicare all'esterno la ricchezza di vita, di giudizi, di tentativi, di opere che nascono dalle persone e dalle comunità. L'iter communionis è proprio la vita del movimento. Scrivete all'iter communionis le vostre esperienze, ci fate bene. E allora si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia?
Vi prego, vi imploro, con umiltà e con fiducia, permettete a Cristo di parlare all'uomo.
Don Giuseppe aveva capito il problema che avevo. Se la tua vocazione è vero, il tuo lavoro verrà fuori anche dai sassi.
Di comunicare la fede agli altri, ma veramente insieme a loro riscoprire che cos'è la fede, che cos'è la fede per me. Portare Cristo agli altri, comunicarlo agli altri è l'unico modo che abbiamo per conoscerlo veramente.
L'Itere Communionis aiuta a comunicare all'esterno la ricchezza di vita, di giudizi, di tentativi, di opere che nascono dalle persone e dalle comunità. L'Itere Communionis è proprio la vita del movimento. Scrivete all'Itere Communionis le vostre esperienze, ci fate bene.
Civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for being so many at this session. If you want peace, prepare for peace, Father Primo Mazzolari wrote. Peace is not something that has to be done after the war, but it is something that has to be done first and foremost during war. Peace, we have learned that in these 2.5 terrible years in which the rain of bombs is happening every day in Ukraine, can be prepared during war with physical presence, with a hug, with aid, with constructive actions, such as the construction of a refuge from bombardments that is nice and connected even when electricity is not available. And it can be prepared by getting mayors from Italy and Ukraine together and by praying that peace may come together with representatives of all the regions in Lviv or Kyiv. And then the war is not within our power, but building peace is. We can do it. As Pacem in Terris by Pope John XXIII reminds us, peace is not just the absence of conflict, but it is embodied into 4 pillars: the exercise of truth, justice, freedom, solidarity. Today's session is based on an idea of Riccardo Bonaccina, founder of Vita, a magazine where I also worked for many years. Over the last few years, he has been committed to solidarity and closeness with the Ukrainian people. And Riccardo cannot be here in this session this evening, but in his idea and in the idea of the people present here, this is not a debate, it is a moment of witnessing. I would like to thank the people connected with us, Visvaldas Kulbokas, His Excellency Apostolic Nuncio in Kyiv, and then Oleksandra Matviycuk, Ukrainian lawyer and Nobel Peace Prize 2022. And then here on stage, from my right, Angelo Moretti, spokesperson for the European Movement for Nonviolent Action, man. Anastasia Zolotova, director of Ukrainian NGO Emmaus. And Lali Liparteliani, founder of the same NGO Emmaus. I would like to thank you all for being here. I would like to start with the first question to Oleksandra Matviycuk, Nobel Peace Prize winner, Ukrainian lawyer and leader of the Center for Civil Liberties, an organization based in Kyiv that obtained in 2022 the Nobel Peace Prize together with Alexei Belyatsky and the Russian organization Memorial. She appeared on different international media to represent Ukrainian civil society, and in particular in relation with issues regarding displaced people in the country and war crimes and other issues concerning human rights. I would like to ask you this question. Truth, freedom, solidarity, and freedom are pillars of the way to peace. And these are the principles that the Center for Civil Liberties and yourself have been trying to embody, and gathering testimonies and promoting liberty and freedom and justice without forgetting solidarity. From this point of view, having such a confusion in Europe, do you believe that the future of Europe can go through Kyiv in its will for Europe and its search for freedom? The floor goes to our guest.
Thank you very much for providing me a floor and for this unique opportunity to speak on this panel. Thank you for this question, because it's not just a war between two states. This is a war between two systems, authoritarianism and democracy. And with this war, Russia wants to convince the entire world that democracy, human rights, and rule of law are fake values, because they couldn't protect anyone during the war. Russia wants to convince that a state with a powerful military potential and nuclear weapons can break international order, can dictate its rules to entire international community, and even forcibly changed internationally recognized borders. And if Russia succeeds, it will encourage other authoritarian leaders in different parts of the globe to do the same. Russia is an empire. An empire has a center, but no borders. An empire always strives to expand. Ukrainians released from captivity tell us how Russians said that when Ukraine falls, Ukrainians will go to conquer the world together with the Russian army. The forced mobilization of Ukrainians into the Russian troops has long been launched and going on in the territories occupied by Russia. So, regardless if other countries of Europe have a courage to admit it or not, these countries are safe only because Ukraine is still resisting. Let's look to the modern history. Unpunished evil grows. The Russian military committed horrible crimes in Chechnya, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Mali, in Libya, in Syria, in other countries of the world. They have never been punished. They believe they can do whatever they want. If we want to prevent wars in the future, we have to demonstrate justice. We must punish states and their leaders who start wars in the present. In these regards, Ukrainians are fighting for justice not just for themselves, They are trying to prevent a next Russian attack to the next nation. I work with people affected by this war directly, and I know that people in Ukraine want peace much more than anyone else. But peace doesn't come when country which was invaded stop fighting. That's not peace. That's occupation. And occupation is the same war, just in different form. Occupation doesn't reduce human suffering. It simply makes it invisible. I spoke to hundreds of people who survived Russian captivity, men and women. They told me horrible stories, how they were beaten, raped, smashed into wooden boxes, their fingers were cut, their nails were torn away, their nails were drilled, they were electrically shocked through their genitalia. One woman told me how her eye was dug out with a spoon. Occupation, it's not just changing one state flag to another. Occupation means enforced disappearances, torture, rapes, denial of your identity, forcible adoption of your own children, filtration camps, and mass graves. I want to conclude on something which is not very understandable for international community. Putin openly says that the Ukrainian people do not exist, just as the Ukrainian language and culture do not exist, and that we are one people with the Russians. For 10 years, we have been documenting how these words turned into horrible practice. When Russian troops physically exterminate any active people in occupied communities, mayors, priests, journalists, volunteers, environmentalists, teachers, musicians, how they ban Ukrainian language and culture, how they burn Ukrainian books and destroy Ukrainian cultural heritage, how they forcibly taken Ukrainian children to Russia in order to re-educate these children as Russians. Therefore, people in Ukraine have no other choice. If we stop resisting to Russian aggression, it will be no more us. We need a just and sustainable peace, as the Pope Francis mentioned several times in his speeches.
Thank you. Thank you to our dear friend. I will ask you another question later on. Now I would move to His Excellency Visvaldas Kulbokas. He is Lithuanian, 49 years old, and since the 15th of June 2021, so before the war started, he was appointed Apostolic Nuncio in Ukraine. He's the only ambassador who never left the capital after the attack by Russia. The Archbishop knows that it is not enough to express an opinion against war, but it is necessary to build peace. And according to his thought, he says every day when he celebrates the Mass in the morning, I send my personal prayer to those who suffer, and there are so many. They are captives, not just military, but also many civilians. Many children disappeared, and it is a great problem. I'm in touch with associations of family members of these captives, and I receive witnesses of great suffering from them. So I would like to ask him, how is it possible to build peace in this situation? How is it possible to build it when we see that we cannot have any results in the attempts of the political leaders in the world, the Security Council of the world, or the parliaments, the Pope, or the other religious councils in other world churches? You claim that one of the answers, along with the humanitarian dialogue, is to favor the growth of a unity of thinking and feeling in civil society. Being together is important, you said multiple times. But how is it possible to build this unity of thoughts and feel? Thank you. First of all, I would like to say hello to Riccardo Bonaccin, who is not on the stage, but who is following us. I would like to say hello to Giuseppe, to Oleksandra, to Angelo, Anastasia, and many other friends in the room. And also, I want to point out that I was not the only ambassador that stayed in Kiev in February, March 2022. There were at least two people. There was also the Polish ambassador. And what Giuseppe said as chair of this session, referring to my words, where I expressed my convictions that it is necessary to grow with a unity of thinking and in union with the civil society. Well, this is very close to what I think now. It matches the stage of my experience here in Ukraine. When I refer to the stage, I refer to the fact that there is a constant development of our understanding of reality. And this applies to me too. And often this also applies to other people. For example, in some previous stages, there was a big shock. Above all, I was feeling a big shock in myself, all around me, and all the testimonies of the people that had to go through and still go through the terrible situation of captation, and also all the kids that disappeared. And as Giuseppe said, in today's world, we have legal means, at least formally, the Geneva Convention that defines the treatment of captives, both military and civilian captives, or the serious wounded people and the physicians. We also have the United Nations. We have several countries that are called world powers, or that aspire to be that. But all these means cannot really keep up with the power of war. It is as if they would crumble before war. They cannot stop it. They cannot prevent it. So the question is, what can be done in the face of war? How can we rebuild peace? As Pope Francis emphasizes, weapons can never be a solution to war. And I would add that not even war used for defense are legitimate and can be justified, because weapons alone do not go to the roots of the problem, of the causes of a war. And in one way or another, all wars, just like the war by Russia against Ukraine, have previous cases that we can compare to clouds that can tell us that something is not going well. And I myself, I think I can say that I have learned, at least partially during these 2 years and a half, is that I had underestimated some processes. Quite naively, I thought that it was enough to keep them in mind and highlight them and share them with the superiors, the colleagues and the friends, even in the Holy See, or announcing them in the public. But life teaches us that when we face challenges that are enormous, like tragedies, efforts also have to be enormous. It is not enough to use ordinary resources. So my impression here is that institutions of all types, be they states or interstate institutions, world organizations, or even religious organizations, all these institutions have an innate difficulty in playing in advance when war is approaching. It seems like this because there seems to be a lot of bureaucracy, and so sensitivity is lost and reactivity is lost. Moreover, all modern institutions have a heavy workload, urgent workload or considered as such. Therefore, even in the face of emergency, they have the same capacity as before that are already exhausted and they cannot really react. Instead, it seems to me that those who are more capable to perceive emergencies and to react accordingly are the people, not institutions. Even if institutions can be reactive themselves. But this happens provided that inside them, the people making up a certain institutions can be promoted in the right way so that they do not get trapped into all the procedures and the rules, because wars do not follow any rules. They evolve very rapidly. And just for this, institutions that are rigidly regulated inside cannot really do anything before the tragedy of war. They are helpless. This morning I had a conversation with one Catholic lady, I want to emphasize one, who managed to bring humanitarian aid to Ukraine worth $60 million. She has friends in different countries, and today she came with a deacon, with other people, and basically she works by herself. Or I could also mention another gentleman who does not identify with any church, but he is deeply religious and a strong believer at a personal level. He only learned 3 Psalms from the Old Testament, and he recites them by heart. And he tells me how some areas were evacuated by himself, 280 people. Or I could also mention a Protestant parish which evacuated 8,000 people from Mariupol in March 2022, when that city was already beyond the front line. So all these facts are evidence of the fact that the humanity of people, also individuals, have a great potential to respond to any emergency. And I believe that this also applies to war prevention in general. And this is above all the reason why I place my hope in civil society, in the sense of people or groups of people who take the challenges to heart, they reflect together, and they look for ways to deal with them. In this sense, civil society from the outset, I think, has better chance of being more energetic, more dynamic, and more concrete and incisive. Let's take a concrete example. It's a complex example. The world of communication, the mass media. Communication channels are clogged with a lot of news and superficial descriptions and propaganda as well. But my impression is that when there is some persons or some groups that put forward a reflection or a proposal that is well prepared and serious and well thought out, this piece of news also can make its way in this modern and clogged world. So well-prepared proposals can find followers in the positive sense of the term. And to be more precise and to be more effective in elaborating these ideas and these proposals, we need to be together. We have to be a network of friends, friends for humanity. And friendship can be made listening to each other, not as an obligation, but being pushed by our heart. so we can get rid of all the prejudices of absurd things and superficiality. In my experience, this is quite clear. In these 2 years and a half, I received in Ukraine several authorities and groups of people. Among the latest visits, I had the initiatives proposed by the MEN, the European Nonviolent Action Movement, to which also CL and Caritas participated, and other groups. And when people put their heart and attention to that, great things can be accomplished. I often insist with my interlocutors, as a believer, as a bishop, that an essential tool for ending the war is prayer. Obviously, when I speak about the end of war, I'm not referring to the possible occupation of Ukraine, which could mean the cessation of the active use of weapons for some time, but it means something else, peace, as Oleksandra said. I really refer to real peace, peace that can lay the foundations for enduring and long-lasting peace and real peace. So the question is here, who can really understand how this peace should be? To me, the answer is only God and only those men and women who listen and who understand the profoundness of the human being and understand the fact that the man has been created in the image of God. And in this sense, I not just refer to formal prayer, religious prayer, because just think about what Jesus said in his mountain speech. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of peace. So not just those who pray formally, but those who operate for peace, they are children of God. So they do much more than a simple prayer. Understood in this sense, prayer and consequent actions are inexhaustible and unpredictable forces, precisely because they are very attentive to the reality of things. And getting to the last part of my reflection, I would like to refer to a passage that is so dear to me. I was reading the passage of the Gospel where the tax collector got to Capernaum, to Apostle Peter, and asked Jesus if Jesus was going to pay the tax of the temple. And then Jesus explains to Apostle Peter later that he's not forced to pay such a tax because he's the Son of God. However, he tells Peter, so that they will not be scandalized, go to the lake, cast a hook, and the first fish you'll find a silver coin, take it and store it for them and give it to them. So if God himself listens carefully to the situation and even adapts himself to it, from not having to pay the tax and then in fact paying it so that they don't get scandalized, this is really greater. So one does not just start from theory, from tenets, from pre-prepared criteria and laws, but interpreting reality, capturing the signals, the psychology of people, the opportunities and the possibilities. I understand this is a huge challenge, but I have trust in humanity and in the strength of friendship. And I see many friends gathered today, and I also believe in the ability of friends to face such a challenge. And I would like to share this faith and conviction with you all. Thank you very much.
Ecco, grazie a Sua Eccellenza, in particolare.
Thank you very much for insisting on this concept, on the idea that people are the main hope keepers, people and groups of people. And now I'd like to ask another question to Alexander Matviycuk, because we know that you have to leave us. So you said that in Ukraine, so everybody wants peace more than anybody else. So this may sound strange, because maybe they have other concerns, but I mean, a person living through war, experiencing war, I mean, how can such a person perceive the word peace? Does this word still have a meaning, a real meaning? Is this connected to hope, real hope?
Let me try to bring a human dimension when I try to answer in this question. Because when war and peace are discussed on an international level, very often politicians lose this human dimension. And let me tell you one story. This is a story of children's writer Volodymyr Vakulenko. When Russians occupied Kharkiv region, he disappeared. Volodymyr Vakulenko wrote beautiful stories for Ukrainian children and the whole generations brought up on his daddy's book. His family hoped to the last that Volodymyr is alive, and just like thousands of other Ukrainian civilians are illegally taken to Russian captivity. But when Ukrainian army liberated these territories, we found a mass graves near forest, near town, which is called Izum. And in these mass graves, in one of them, under the number 319, we found a dead bodies of this children writer, Volodymyr Vakulenko. You can ask me, why Russians killed children writer? Because I work with war crimes which Russians are committing in occupied territories for 10 years, I have only one answer: because they can. Because we have to define the world peace properly. Sustainable peace is the freedom to live without fear of violence and to have a long-term perspective for future, which people in occupied territories haven't. People in occupied territories live in gray zone. They have no tools how to defend their rights, their freedom, their property, their lives, and their beloved ones. We need peace, but not occupation. Russia didn't stop after occupying Crimea and Donbas 10 years ago. So calls for Ukraine to stop defending itself and satisfy Russia's imperial appetites are not just wrong, because Russia will not stop. Such calls are immoral, because we can't leave people alone for torture and death under Russian occupation. It's our people, it's our friends, it's our neighbors, it's our colleagues, it's our relatives, it's human beings. The life of human beings can't be political compromise. But I don't want to leave on the pessimist note, and let me tell you and share to the end something which I found very important to share. I would never wish any nation to go through our experience, because war is horrible. War probably is the most horrible thing which just can happen in the human life. But these dramatic times provide people an opportunity to express the best in us, to be courageous, to fight for freedom, to make difficult but right choices, and to help each other. Because only when we help each other, when we express solidarity, when people in Ukraine risked their life for someone whom they never met before, only in this moment we are acutely aware what does it mean to be human. And this war, this horror, remind us what does it mean to be a human.
Grazie.
Before leaving you, I ask you and the Nuncio, so there are thousands of people following us in person and from remote. So the people who listened to your words, how can people try to do something for the cause of peace?
Oleksandra,
Prego, prego. Beh, se vuole rispondere lei.
Okay, the Nuncio start.
Ciò che diceva anche
What Oleksandra said about understanding peace is something that is connected to civil society. So we should reinforce and support civil society in Ukraine. And then, as Oleksandra said, what is peace? We really need to somehow support the dissemination of this concept. And Oleksandra said it very clearly. So the occupation is not peace. And this sentence, this statement, should be disseminated more and more. This is a very simple statement, but this could be helpful to disseminate this statement, because this is a very clear and simple concept and very important one. So I hope that by spreading this message and this kind of message, we can do something, because we all together can be a network. And I think that we should also connect our hearts, because you want to help Ukraine. You are trying to find ways. So this is one way to disseminate this very clear message. Alexandra?
I will, based on something which you just heard, and I totally support the previous speaker. I'm a human rights lawyer, but now I found myself in a situation when the law doesn't work, when I have no legal instruments which I can use to stop Russian atrocities. But I know from my own experience, when you can't rely on the legal instruments, you can still rely on people. Because ordinary people have a much great impact that they can even imagine. And we need your voice. We need your voice in favor of freedom and justice. We are fighting for something which have no limitation in national border. It's freedom. And there are another thing which has no limitation in national borders. It's solidarity. And solidarity has to be proactive.
Grazie, grazie.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you very much to our remote guests. Let's now move on to our guests in person. I start with Angelo Moretti. Angelo Moretti is the president of Sale della Terra, a civil economy network, and also say representative of a community of small municipalities. But Mr. Moretti today here somehow represents something else, because last July 11th and the 12th, the European Nonviolent Action Movement, of which he is the animator, together with Marianella Sclavi, Riccardo Bonaccini, and Marco Bentivoglio, and is also the spokesperson of this movement, went back for the 11th time to Ukraine to pray, but also to reflect on the necessary steps to get out of the war. So could you please tell us something more about your commitment as peacemakers, peacekeepers, as concrete pacifists, as Oleksandra liked to say, peacemakers, or following the gospel as peacemakers, something that started in April 2022. What was the result of this last mission that you accomplished last July, on July 11th and 12th of this year? The floor goes to you. Thank you very much, Giuseppe, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for this very important moment of reflection on what is happening in Ukraine and what we can do in such difficult condition, because this is really a war that is next door. So our last mission to Kyiv last July was a failure. It was a beautiful failure. And I mean, it was another failure. And I want to tell you why it was a failure. Because it's important to understand what went wrong, but what can, work and what is working. So Ukraine was invaded by a nuclear power, and that somehow triggered something new in Europe. And Bobbio, who is a philosopher of peace and right, said that with Hiroshima, so the history of pacifist movement changed, because, it seemed that after that, people seemed to want peace because the threat of the extinction of humankind was terrifying. So that the nuclear war was such a terrible threat. So, that's the way he said Hiroshima changed pacifism. But when the Berlin War went down, and so we thought that the nuclear deterrence was over, well, we thought that maybe these sort of nuclear deterrence could come to an end. And as Fukuyama said, maybe it was the end of history. But then in Europe, we somehow had a sort of downhill road attitude. So there was no need to talk about deterrence or peace or pacifism. So the future seemed to be guaranteed. But then the geopolitical condition that we experienced after the fall of the Berlin Wall, it was something transitional. And we saw that actually that was the last stage of an already written history. But then on February 24th, 2022, we went from a cold war to a very hot war. The aggression against Ukraine was the start of a global war. For us, Europeans, it was still a lukewarm global war, but actually this threatens to become extremely hot before our eyes and our impotent, well-aware consciousness. But Putin's army was successfully rejected when there was a first attempt to seize Kyiv in March 2022. So it's important to trace back these steps. But then the army was able to kidnap more than 16,000 children and occupy micro-rural areas and large urban territories, such as Mariupol, the city of Mary. So we are now faced with a new turning point in history. Are we at the end of deterrence, or are we at a new form of post-Cold War deterrence? That is why I'm talking about failure. So the European Nonviolent Action Movement has been shouting to Europeans for the last 2 years, let's get together in mass nonviolent action against the invader. We must do something if we really want to avoid nuclear escalation. But at the same time, we loudly demand that there be a just peace for the Ukrainian people. So we need now to trigger a mass civic mobilization, not only a metaphorical one, but really we need to mobilize people's legs. We have talked a lot about minds and hearts, but now it's time to move legs. So Kyiv is a 2-day drive from Rome. So in less than 2 days, you can reach the center of Ukraine. We have the fastest communication means ever. So nobody is forcing us to remain spectators of such war, that we are forced to watch that war on television or on the screen of our smartphones, because, I mean, this is not about that. So Lanzo del Vasta, a great pacifist, wrote, if they hit the cheek of your brother, you should offer yours. So, I mean, we can offer millions of cheeks to Putin, because if we were to go to Ukraine tomorrow, we can do it. We are free men and women, and we can go there and say, okay, we are all there. Okay, now attack all of us. We could do that, but we're going through weird times. We don't do such a thing. We are living a great tension, so we have a war in our courtyard, but then we do not act. What are we afraid of? Are we afraid of dying? Are we afraid of what? Of committing ourselves? Giovanni Sartori used to talk about men that just watch things. We are somehow the children of advertisement. So you can earn money without working, you can lose weight without exercising, and maybe we can get peace without doing anything. So we are asking to an attacked, violated country to reach peace, as if it was the easiest thing for them to do. But actually, we should realize that we can't somehow rely on somebody else to find a solution. And pacifism is not something that other people have to do. It's not up to another people. But somehow this war is telling us it is up to us now. It is up to us Europeans and not to Ukrainians. So we have come together from Catholic Action to Masci, from Anci to the Salt of the Earth Network, from the charity networks to Vita, to Base Italia, to the Italian volunteer movement. So we went 11 times to Ukraine, ordinary men and women, international conflict experts, but also people like Marianella Sclavi, extraordinary and less experienced people like me, but then pacifists, environmentalists, Catholics, lay people. And we have tried to give our contribution to this story at the service of peace, to listen to our Ukrainian brothers and sisters, but not here safely in Italy, but there in Ukraine, in Lviv, Kyiv, Mykolaiv, Brovary, Rodina, 30 kilometers from the front, to tell them, here we are. We share the fear, the air shelters, the anxiety, the lack of response to so much violence, the heat, but also the cold, the lack of water and light. And we realize that even though we seem to be useless, actually Ukrainians loved us to be there. Nikolai, the mayor of Orodnya, is a very little town between White Russia and Russia. So was moved by our presence. We were just 4, and he said, I haven't seen a civil foreigner over the last 2 years. So Orania has 11,000 inhabitants, and the Ukrainians just set themselves free by themselves. So the Russians arrived with tanks. and you organized peaceful protests every day, and they were able to sabotage a center, and they surrounded the Russian soldiers with flags and chanting, and the Russians at one point decided to leave that town. But that town now is isolated. When the mayor saw us, said, "I'm so moved to see that somebody is still thinking about us, knows that we still exist." And hundreds of towns have been liberated at that. And there are so many nonviolent, peaceful stories in Ukraine, like this one. And the Ukrainian resistance is extraordinary. We heard so much. We talked with everybody, civil society organizations, religious leaders, members of parliament, young people, and religious people. And we tried to talk to them to understand what we could do together. And we also reflected on, the index of revenge, the impulse for revenge, that being victims of brutal aggression can arise in us. And so together we started Ukrainian and European civil society, the lessons from the African culture of Ubuntu. We wrote shared documents on the possibility of disproving the enemy, displacing it, demonstrating, in despite of everything, that the path of human compassion, solidarity, respect is a viable one. We agreed that reacting to the violence of despotism with more democracy is a key weapon for ultimate victory. While armies are fighting the war, trying to prevail or not to succumb, we can already build the Europe that will come tomorrow, when Ukraine will be in our political community, and we study together. If in Rome in 1957, the first European Community treaties were signed and Rome had been destroyed, was wounded, maybe in Kyiv we will start and trigger the European Common Defense. So Spinelli in the Ventotene Manifesto wrote about that, De Gasperi too. So our founding fathers had already thought about that. So now it's high time to think more about this. So we should think about the civil peaceful corps, the organizations that Oleksandra defined in a very specific way. He was far-sighted. He said that what could be a big, important news in the history of Europe, the ability to intervene before, during, and after civil peace corps in order to intervene also to maintain peace. If we had a truce today in Donbas, well, that could not be forcefully peace. There could be violence and revenge. And why do we speak about a failure about our missions, but we will keep going there in spite of everything? Because peace is a pearl, and it's worth 1,000 dives. It doesn't matter if you have to dive 1,000 and thousands of times, because sooner or later you will find the pearl. You never know when you will find it. You never know when the victory will come, but you need to keep attempting. So we made a beautiful, useless dive, but we are ready to keep diving to find that pearl that is peace. And even if we haven't found that pearl yet, so each and every one of those dives was useful, because our physical presence was able to convey to our Ukrainian brothers and sisters a lot. So we helped them somehow get rid of the poison that is disseminated by war, and we could do that by sharing, praying, and sufferance and pain. So if one day these beautiful peace corps will see the day, they will be the result of shared pain and suffering that will become a higher good. Thank you.
No, Lali Liparteliani.
Lali Liparteliani, you're co-founder of Emmaus NGO, established in 2011 to support the disabled, the youth, women. So I ask you to tell us what did it mean to you to flee the war with 2 children, a destiny that you shared with other millions of Ukrainians. So how can you somehow heal hatred, and how can you demine hearts? Thank you, Giuseppe. Hello, everybody. And when I hear say that peace is the exercise of peace, freedom, solidarity, and justice, each and every one of these words resonate in my heart, because the presence of a conflict in my country is connected to the reduction of truth, to the destruction of freedom and justice, to the propaganda of an absurd and absolute lie from Russia. Every day I live knowing that my forced migration experience is strictly related to the lie on which this war was built. It is related to an injustice that is stealing the lives of thousands of people. So we really needed to testify the truth. We need to implement justice, and I'm grateful to my community for the freedom and solidarity experience that I can experience with you. So the forced abandoning of my house was the result of the clear realization that Ukraine was not a safe place any longer. 1 year before the war, I lost my husband, so I was alone, and I had to get organized in order to leave the country. When it was not too late. Being a refugee is a constant and heavy load, is a constant and unstoppable pain. You can't share joy fully. You can't share joy with anybody else who remained in Ukraine. So to me, this means also the impossibility to visit the grave of my husband. All of this is not just words, it's my own experience. 2 days ago, Mariupol, in the occupied area, the dad of a dear friend died, and my friend cannot go there to say goodbye to his father. My brother and his friend in Kharkiv cannot visit my husband's grave because the cemeteries were filled with mines. But today I would like to say something about a less known aspect of this experience of loss of oneself, loss of orientation, because when you are kicked out of your own life, means first and foremost the loss of one's own identity. It's hard for me to illustrate what this means. It's hard for me to explain, to make you understand, but certainly, suddenly, I found myself a different person. For instance, when I was 41, I felt like being 92 years old. And I'm a woman, but I felt like a man who had to fix so many problems all at once. I am the younger daughter, but suddenly my parents became sort of vulnerable as little children, and I found myself in a foreign country, and I had to live in a very small space. And so all that is the result of this forced escape, looking for safety. And it is something that has meant leaving behind everything that was familiar to me. And the only thing that has remained the same is not the age, the nationality, the education, or the gender. The only thing that has remained the same in me and that has become a pillar for me is the awareness that I belong to Christ. So the presence of Christ has remained inside me as something constant, as a sort of a polar star, in spite of everything I went through. So in spite of doubts, of disenchantment and fear, I felt that in spite of everything, So the horror, I am still sort of supported by Christ. So thanks to Christ, I do not feel like a foreigner, like a widow, like a person far from her home. No, I have somehow regained the integrity of my experience. So my community was a huge support, as well as many people that sustained me in my darkest days. I belong to Christ, and thanks to this, I can fully live. Once I heard the reaction by Don Giuseppe when hearing the complaints by a person who had donated money to a poor woman and that had reacted negatively when this person knew that that woman had bought the money to buy a lipstick. Giuseppe said, "You did not understand anything about sharing because you need to understand the needs of the other and the welcome of the other." So that person had not understood that in that point in time that woman needed to feel beautiful. And this story, this anecdote, always moves me so much, especially now when we try to understand what refugees experience. So it's not about morality, it's not about sentimentality, it's about being human, it's about our natural human desire to be happy. Very often we respond to requests for help, but in an equally easy way, we try to define, the people in need just as victims. So we try to somehow frame them in a definition, and we think that these people should be satisfied by specific things and should always be grateful. We think we know better than them, that we know them better than themselves. I'm grateful to Don Giuseppe because he somehow highlights our need for beauty, but also recognizing and acknowledges the dignity of every human being regardless of their situation. So Don Giuseppe teaches us to see every individual in their plenitude and fullness. And I'm grateful to the family in Brescia that welcomed us, because from the very first day they looked at us with this gaze that gave us back our dignity. I'm grateful to the friends, to those who welcome Ukrainians in Italy. Thanks for your gaze, for your hearts, for opening your hearts so widely. I'm grateful to each and every one of you for everything you do, because what you do is a proof of the solidarity existing between us. How can we demine hearts? How can we stop hatred? How can we stop all this? Once I heard say that in the Church of Notre Dame, 5 minutes were enough to destroy the large glass windows. At that time, I was going through very difficult times, and sometimes in 5 minutes, my heart also was risking to be destroyed. But rejecting love, rejecting being human, rejecting the ability to love is so risky. I almost destroyed and closed my eyes, but the human heart is much more fragile than large church glass windows. But I try to be loyal to my heart. I try to be loyal to the nature of my heart. I did not want my heart to crumble under the pressure of hatred and fear. Thanks to my friends, I could share joys and pain and difficulties. I was forgiven and hugged more than once, even was I not able to somehow forgive myself. So he always waits for me, and like the prodigal child, and I can try to forgive myself. I'm grateful to God for everything he gave to me, and I can live every day being aware of the many good things that are part of my life. And Don Giuseppe told me all this. It's a long, long way inside the community. And there is still something else helping me preserve my heart. The almost physical feeling that every time when everything seems to be unbearable and difficult and hard, so our Lord sees me sitting under a tree. And so one day I will hear those words. I saw you under the tree. Thank you. Thank you, Lali.
Anastasia, grazie per l'applauso.
Thank you. Anastasia, you are the director of Emmaus in Kharkiv. And you rescued many disabled people, and you still support the disabled youth in Kharkiv. Kharkiv has been heavily hit by Russian drones and missiles. There were 190 warnings per month with many, many buildings that were hit, and many people, even disabled ones, who cannot leave their homes. You kept working on your solidarity projects. I know that you try to heal hearts, and sometimes you learn a lot from these young disabled people. Can you please share your testimony with us?
Good afternoon, everyone. War at home brings a pain that is long-lasting. It doesn't stop. It is not like individual's personal pain in everyone's life, but it is the entire people suffering. This story I want to tell you is from Kharkiv, a city in the front line that is constantly bombarded. The 24th of February 2022, the day when Russia invaded Ukraine and the large-scale war started, part of us was already in Leopolis, and one of our kids, Irka, said to us, I was really fearing the fact that you were going to say that God does not exist, and with a cruel war, a situation which puts into question the value of life for every person, with all the numbers that we know after each bombardment, that the people do not remain there, they're worth nothing. So war can push us to have the same fear as Irka's, that is the fear that God has abandoned us. Our kids have already experienced the violence that was perpetrated over time, similar to war, that is, being abandoned as they are orphans. And they actually believe that their birth was a mistake and that their destiny is suffering. For this reason, we decided to take them away from war, because we don't want them to experience all this violence again. Once these kids had been taken to Italy in a safe place, we welcomed other Ukrainians. And we ourselves were broken and destroyed, and we wanted to help other people in a similar condition. And Irka again said we had to leave behind everything. The only thing we could preserve from Ukraine is our friendship. We managed to bring with us that home made of relations, love, and affection. It was really this home of relations that helped us to start again here and to try and help other people, wounded people like us. We've been living in Italy for 2 years and a half, but our heart is still in Ukraine. Part of Emmaus remained in Kharkiv, and our heart is there with our dear ones, with colleagues, with all the suffering people. We live this suffering, which is not understandable, the presence of absolute evil. children that lose their parents, or mothers losing one of their kids, or kids kidnapped to Russia, friends who fight in the front line, or that they were made captive and tortured, and that they cannot communicate with other people waiting for us, people separating at the train stop, and they will never know if they will see again. The cities burnt, everything destroyed. And then the presence of death, the death of Asia, a friend of Emmaus, an entrepreneur from Kharkiv. His family was welcomed here in Italy, but recently they went back to Kyiv. The brother was a volunteer in fighting in the first months of the war, and then he disappeared. He was sought for a long time, and when he was found, it was not possible to recognize him anymore. And Valsha, the elder brother, has to find a word to tell their mother that a DNA test must be taken to understand whether that was found was really his son. So many dead people every day. As Miroslav Marinovich said, after the Second World War, the Jewish were asking, where was God in Auschwitz? Now Ukrainians ask, where was God in Bucha? There is no answer, satisfactory answer to this question yet. I don't mean that there is a general response, as Marinovich said. Sometimes this is discussed, but I would like to hear a strong prophetic voice from the Church, because it is true that washing out the wounds is an important function of the Church, but it is not the only one. The people need answers, otherwise they get lost. Why did I lose my dear ones? What is the sense of death? At the end of the day, the Church has to interpret the sacrifice of one's life. There are moments where the heart is provoked by these questions and it gets stoned, and no exercise of bounty or hope can be useful, and even cry is refused because nothing changes. Personally, last spring, I was feeling the burden of evil and war, and I couldn't understand the sense of it. I was tormented by questions. I went to Father Paolo's spiritual exercises, and something happened there because I felt myself understood. I felt that hoping is difficult, especially not the first day, but also the second day, the third day, that is over time. Hope is not being optimistic, is not jumping beyond the war and getting to peace immediately. Preparing peace in this way would imply calling the assassins with their names, but there are many obstacles in this process. And in understanding this, I was helped by this story by Father Paolo, the story of Mary that went to the sepulchre, but she didn't find her. She was crying. She kept crying. Her tears were blurring her sight, so she couldn't see the angels. She didn't recognize them. Her tears didn't make her see the miracle of resurrection, but on the other side, her tears helped Christ and pushed Christ to appear first and foremost to her and to say, Mary, don't cry. We have to have the certainty of the fact that Jesus can come to every dark place in the world and to win. The faith can give us the strength to walk with this courage. And courage is needed because there is a lot of solidarity needed to prepare just peace, and because the wounds of war will have to be healed. As the Bishop of Kharkiv, our friend Monsignor Pavlo Moncharuk, said once about the wounds, it is not the time to get back. He said that because he knows our history and he knows that for us in Emmaus, accompanying people with disability, going back to Kharkiv would be dangerous. And knowing what we are doing in Italy, he said, continue to help Ukrainian people abroad. We had the courage to do it, even if we had to do everything from scratch. But it is just thanks to many friends, new and old ones, many of you here in this room, that many Ukrainian people that had nothing are now able to reconstruct, to rebuild their life. Thanks to your continuous help and support, we found strong foundations on which we could base our life again. But then he said he added, be prepared to get back as many as you can. You have to be many because the wounds are many. Orphans, children, mutilated people, people that lost their sense of their lives. There will be energy needed, people that can help to rebirth again. So be prepared to be there as many as you can.
Eccoci. E non...
I cannot add anything else because what we have just heard has a great intensity. We just wanted to follow Riccardo's idea. I would like to invite Giulia Villa with a short text. Giulia Villa is an excellent actress of the Theatre Desidera in Milan. It is a brief text by Don Nobel, who was Bishop of Molfetta, who died in 1993. And there is now a beatification process going on. And he's a symbol for the commitment of peace and all the things that we mentioned today. On the 7th of December 1992, he left with 500 volunteers from Ancona to Dalmatia in the coast with a walk that led him to the city of Sarajevo. We can refer to what Moretti said, that had been under the siege of Serbia, just to bring their presence. So, Giulia, you have the floor. To tell the truth, we're not so used to link the word peace to dynamic concepts. Rarely we hear that man gets tired in peace or fights in peace or tears away the life with peace. It is more useful to hear in our language expressions such as they are sitting in peace, they are reading in peace, they are meditating in peace, and of course, they are resting in peace. They rest in peace. So peace reminds us of our comfort of the living room more than the dangers in the street, more the fireplace than the office full of problems, more the silence of the desert than the traffic in the metropolis, more the shadow of a church than a trade union meeting, more the mystery of the night than the noise of the day. Perhaps it takes a revolution in mentality to understand that peace is not a given, but an achievement, not a consumer good, but the product of a commitment, not a starting ribbon, but a finishing banner. Peace requires struggle, suffering, tenacity. It demands high costs of understanding and sacrifice. It rejects the temptation of enjoyment. It does not tolerate sedentary attitude. It does not annul conflictuality. It has little to do with the banal, peaceful life. Yes, peace, before being an achievement, is a path, and moreover, an uphill path. It means that it has its own roadmaps and rhythms and pace and preferential routes and technical times, its slowdowns and its accelerations, perhaps even its stops. If so, patient waiting is required. And they will be blessed because they are peacemakers, not those who claim to be at the arrival without ever having left, but those who departs with the mirage of a stop always joyfully glimpsed, even if never on this earth, of course, fully reached.
Ecco, dunque ringrazio.
I would like to thank our guests because they have really participated in first person, and we have listened to their truth. And as Monsignor Kulbokas said, we need people that put themselves at stake. I would like to thank the Monsignor that remained online. A round of applause for you. And I would like to thank all the people on the stage and Oleksandra Matviycuk, Nobel Peace Prize winner that connected online. And you know that these sessions are really possible thanks to the support of the meeting that can give voice to the voices that we have listened to. So please support the meeting of Rimini, and thank you all again.
Civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Si è voltato improvvisamente la gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia?
Vi prego, vi imploro, con umiltà e con fiducia, permettete a Cristo di parlare all'uomo.
Don Giuseppe aveva capito il problema che avevo. Se la tua vocazione è vero, il tuo lavoro verrà fuori anche dai sassi.
Di comunicare la fede agli altri, ma veramente insieme a loro riscoprire che cos'è la fede, che cos'è la fede per me. Portare Cristo agli altri, comunicarlo agli altri è l'unico modo che abbiamo per conoscerlo veramente.
L'iter communionis aiuta a comunicare all'esterno la ricchezza di vita, di giudizi, di tentativi, di opere che nascono dalle persone e dalle comunità. L'iter communionis è proprio la vita del movimento. Scrivete all'iter communionis le vostre esperienze, ci fate bene. Si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia?
Vi prego, vi imploro, con umiltà e con fiducia, permettete a Cristo di parlare all'uomo.
Don Giuseppe aveva capito il problema che avevo. Se la tua vocazione è vero, il tuo lavoro verrà fuori anche dai sassi.
Di comunicare la fede agli altri, ma veramente insieme a loro riscoprire che cos'è la fede, che cos'è la fede per me. Portare Cristo agli altri, comunicarlo agli altri è l'unico modo che abbiamo per conoscerlo veramente.
L'iter communionis aiuta a comunicare all'esterno la ricchezza di vita, di giudizi, di tentativi, di opere che nascono dalle persone e dalle comunità. L'iter communionis è proprio la vita del movimento. Scrivete all'iter communionis le vostre esperienze, ci fate bene.